So James also turns, as he does in other chapters, to criticisms of the view, and he gives a criticism of humanism very much like one we saw in chapter 2. He says, listen, is pragmatism a relativism? Is the view that any truth is so if the humanist wills it be so? And James's response here is a little different than in chapter 2. He introduces the pragmatic difference between a distinction he's already enunciated about pluralism and rationalism. He says, listen, pragmatism is not just about knowledge, it's about the shape of the universe itself. At bottom, there are really two different kinds of alternatives that are being opposed here, and they're rooted in temperament. What's diverging here is the difference, on the one hand, of pluralism and on the other hand, of rationalism. The pluralist view of the world is that nothing is beyond experience. The universe is not one thing, it's a pluriverse, right? Pluriverse, it's even hard to say that word, but it's full of many remakings, many takings from many perspectives. He says, and this is a quote, "For pluralistic pragmatism, truth grows up inside all of those finite experiences. They lean on each other, but the whole of them, if such a whole there be, leans on nothing. All homes are in finite experience. Finite experience, as such, is homeless. Nothing outside the flux secures the issue of it. It can hope salvation only from its own intrinsic promises and potencies." In other words, this life, our experience, doesn't rest on anything else. It's completely made of itself, looking towards itself, remaking itself. There's nothing else that it rests on or looks towards. The rationalist view, and he says this, James says this is a kind of anarchistic temperament. But it's anarchistic only if you think that you're an anarchist if you don't have some completely fixed reality, goal, truth, right, or maybe spiritual higher power. The view it opposes, he calls, the rationalist view, and this is a very different kind of temperament. It's an authoritative temperament. It despises disorder, right? It says, look, there's one world. Many people get it wrong, right? There's not many worlds. Not many universes, and there's a real single order that underlies the many interpretations, and that's what holds everything together, and that's what makes things true. Right? So, does pragmatism come down on these ideas of reality? Well, we see that there are different views, and we see that they're opposed. And then the question becomes, well, is James, the pragmatist, the humanist, going to declare one is absolutely right and the other is wrong? James says no. He says, look, you can think about a tough-minded, sort of scientific, empiricist reaction to this, or a tender-minded, right, spiritualist, religious reaction to this. Right, a tough-minded scientist is going to hear the rationalist talk about this view of the whole and how everything hangs together and it's all one. And he's going to say, or she's going to say, I don't see any evidence of that. I don't see how things hang together. I see how things clump together here and there, but how they hang together as some ultimate, rational, perfect whole? Come on. You're just making that up, right? But the tender-minded religious types are going to find in rationalism something that fulfills very deep needs, right? The need for order, the need for structure, the need for explanation. So in the end, James says, pragmatism can't choose between the tough-minded scientific approach, the fact-based empiricism, or the tender-minded religiously inclined rationalism. It has to be variable, it has to be pluralist, because people are different and they need different things. And so James says, once more, either the pluralistic or the rationalistic hypothesis is legitimate in the pragmatist eyes, for either has its uses. We cannot therefore methodically join the tough minds, the scientific minds, in their rejection of the whole notion of a world beyond our finite experience. One misunderstanding of pragmatism is to identify it with positivistic tough-mindedness, to suppose that pragmatism scorns every rationalistic notion as just so much jabber and gesticulation, that it loves intellectual anarchy as such and prefers a sort of wolf world, absolutely unpent and wild and without a master or a collar, to any philosophic room, class, product whatsoever. James says, I have said so much in these lectures against the over-tender forms of rationalism that I am now prepared for some misunderstanding here, but I have to confess that the amount of it that I have found in this very audience surprises me, for I have simultaneously defended rationalistic hypotheses so far as these redirect you fruitfully into experience. So what we see here is James being a mediator, James mediating between science and religion, between British empiricism and continental and Anglo-American rationalism, right? He is saying it depends, it all comes down to the uses to which these things are put. Now, I think he's put his thumb on the scale. He sees that certain ways of thinking take you away from life, take you away from experience, and sort of locate you in a kind of never-never land, right? In the sense that it never cashes out in practical experience. And so there is in James a scientific mindset which sort of reasserts itself. But James is a deeply questing and spiritual person, and he understands that religion and spirituality has deep meaning for people. It held his father's life together. It bound his father's life into a whole. And so James is trying to mediate here between the big tensions, between the tensions between science and religion, between the tensions between empiricism and rationalism. I think we still see a lot of those tensions today, and I think that the mediating function of pragmatism still has an interesting role to play in many of the debates that we see in our lives. So this is the end of the lecture on Chapter 7 of James's Pragmatism. I hope it was helpful, and I hope it leads to some good discussion. Thank you.